Technology is the biggest industry in Europe, but women remain vastly underrepresented. As International Women's Day is celebrated this weekend, we look at what's being done to encourage more women into this growing sector. Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, the growth of technology is helping to shape the global future, but the industry is still struggling to attract women. That's despite efforts to close the gender gap. Women hold only 22% of tech jobs across European companies. By 2027, it's predicted there'll be a shortfall of around 3.9 million people in tech. That's within the European Union. Doubling the share of women to 45% could help fill the roles and add as much as $630 billion to the EU economy. So what can be done to get more women into the field? I'm delighted to say that joining me in the studio here to discuss the topic, we have Jager Glusina. She's Chief of Staff at Luminance, that's a legal AI platform. And Naomi Kerbel, she is Director of Communications at SEC Newgate. And in Rome, Angelica Donati, she is a prop tech analyst and president of Ance Giovanni. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. Jager, we keep hearing about these so-called tech bros all the time. Where are the tech sisters?
Well, that's down to us. We really need to be encouraging more women into technology. There's still a major underrepresentation of women in the field, and that's something that we can start to change today. But I hope what we will talk about today is where that change has to come from. It needs to start at the top, and I'm saying the government, investors, companies themselves, the culture that the companies are creating, and then the schools and what they're offering on the curriculum. So, with a little bit of change, and we can make that change, I think we will see huge strides towards hearing about the tech sisters.
Naomi, how big a problem is underrepresentation then in the tech world?
Well, if we look at 2025 this year, we've got around 28% of women in the STEM workforce. And if you think about women in leadership positions, that's slightly lower at around 27%. So it is an issue. But I think, to Jager's point, we need to be reframing this a little bit because it's not about women per se. It's actually about the opportunity that involving the wider population. And that's where I think we struggle because we make this a women's issue, and this is not a women's issue. Again, to Jager's point, it's bottom up, top down. We need to start in primary schools. You know, children, young boys think that they have more opportunity, they can negotiate better. There was a recent study done of 6-year-old children, and when they were asked to play together, 65% of them said that they had played very, very well versus the girls. So you're already including this bias very, very early on.
Angelica, give us your thoughts on where all the leaders in the female world of tech are and why we're not seeing so many of them.
Well, I couldn't agree more with what's already been said. The problem comes from a long way away. It comes from how we present opportunities to young people. You know, the numbers that were being given of 28% of women in STEM fields, I think, are much worse if you look at my sector, for example, construction and property. There's only about 10% of women in the construction sector across the board, and only about 10%. You've got a higher number when you think about clerical roles, and a much lower number when you think about builders. But we're not here to talk about builders. But in the engineering space, so in the more technologically focused space, the number is 10%, and it comes from a place of women not being told, girls not being told that they can do this as a career. And so I 100% agree. There needs to be a top-down approach on the governmental level where there need to be more government policies in place to increase female inclusion in the workforce throughout business, not just in tech. But more so, or rather, together with this, there needs to be a change in mindset when it comes to, you know, what are things for boys and what are things for girls. The truth is that boys and girls can do exactly the same things, and that the the biggest level of success company-wide comes when there are teams that are mixed, which are male and female. So the underlying point is it's not to benefit women, it's to benefit the economy. There were a lot of studies about the effect, the positive effect that inclusion of women in the workforce can have on global GDP, and we're talking about full percentage points increases in performance on GDP. And so it really is a transversal issue. It's not just a women's issue, I believe.
Jager, to you, that's a very good point. Boys and girls can do exactly the same things. So why aren't schools encouraging more girls into the tech sector?
Well, that's a great question, and I would look to the schools to answer that one. I think there is so much more that can be done to encourage the conversations, but let's bring in some role models to the school. Let's bring in examples of where women who have not just studied in STEM subjects, but also much broader humanities, law, whatever it may be, have actually left traditional fields to go into technology. I feel very lucky to work at a company where we're actually 50% female representative on the management team. And actually, what's quite interesting is that a lot of the women who've risen through the ranks over the years didn't come from techie backgrounds. They actually came from sales, marketing, and even the law, like myself. So it's about broadening the conversation and saying, you can study all of these fields, but neither of those are exclusive of a career in technology, and all of them can build the skills to get there.
Naomi, do you think we need government education departments talking to senior leaders in education to be saying that, you need to be telling young girls that tech is a great industry to get into and you can do it?
I think it's probably already happening. We probably aren't doing a great PR and comms job about the fact it's already happening. So I think there needs to be more campaigns out there, and that's the world that I'm in. A lot of this is about storytelling. It's about what you aspire to be in your life. And to the point about role models, seeing people up there who are doing cool things is very exciting and enticing. And if you think about the role models that we can name in the tech space, they tend to be the tech bros. And if you look overseas, given all the geopolitics that's going on right now, it's tech bros that are standing behind the US presidents on global stages. And I think that is very telling, and that's something that needs to be shifted.
Angelica, what's the conversation like then in Italy? In your experience, do you see very many female leaders in the tech world?
No, we don't, and it kind of ties in with what we've been discussing, because of course the female presence in engineering and STEM roles is just as low in Italy, if not lower than the rest of Europe, the rest of the world. So engineers, we actually have a similar number of female to male engineer graduates, or at least students in our universities. But then when you look at careers, when you look at the workforce, and this is something that I think is the same across sectors and across Europe and across the world, you see women advancing with more difficulty in their careers. And you see in a lot of cases, women being the first to be laid off, not because employers want to lay off women, because I think especially now with diversity and inclusion, there is a drive to hire more women rather than lay them off, but it's because women's careers progress more slowly, and therefore they are in less strategic roles and end up in roles that are more easily substituted. So I think there is a big disconnect between the willingness of women to enter the workforce in these sectors.
Jager, we hear so much about AI at the moment. It seems to dominate every conversation when we talk about tech and industry. What does the advent of AI mean for young women in tech?
It means a huge opportunity. Women are amazing. Some of the earliest documentation about computers were actually women coding in the background or making calculations, if we go really far back. It was the men actually building the hardware. So if you look back that far, you realize that you've got this hugely talented workforce that's being completely underutilized at the moment for many reasons, because they're not being inspired to go into the field, or they're not in the right working conditions, or they choose to take time off to have a family. But the opportunity is huge. The governments all around the world are pouring money into technology investment. So now is the time to start to encourage women to come to the table and to pursue roles in this space.
Naomi, just come in on that. Your thoughts on AI. What does it mean? Does it offer these opportunities?
So if we'd have rewound a few months, it was scaremongering, doom and gloom, real concerns about AI taking jobs. I think, like Jager, this is a massive opportunity. We've seen a lot of layoffs in the programming space, but actually what we need are the translators, the linguists, those that can communicate with these large language models. And that's what women do incredibly well. And then to the next point that we were hearing just now about the retention piece, that's crucial as well, because what women then have is a real empathetic type of leadership, which will need to be balanced to create a more blended AI workforce.
Angelica, to you, give me your thoughts on AI in your sector and what do you think it will mean for women in tech?
Well, I think AI is a huge opportunity. You know, there's always kind of the catchphrase of the year. This year it's AI. It used to be blockchain, and then it was machine learning, and now we have AI. What I can say is what I'm seeing in the practical applications of AI in my sector, which is construction. All of these innovative technologies which allow optimization in the way we work actually, I think, open the door for more women to enter the workforce, because we're not talking about women who need to be builders, let's say, or who need to be site surveyors. We're talking about women who can learn something which has not been taught in school, which needs to be self-taught, although of course there's also training courses to be had, but they start with exactly the same toolkit as men, so that bias against women does not exist in this space, because the space is completely new and is being built. We're building it, and so there's no reason why women can't jump in front of the bandwagon rather than on the bandwagon and make this a unique selling point for their own skills.
Jager, talk to me about your place then where you work, 50% female leadership. What's the difference? What's it like every day then, knowing that you're going into a workspace where complete equality is there?
Smells great.
Yeah, it does. I love that. And I acknowledge that that is not the common denominator. I think it's very rare and it's very lucky to work in a workplace that is not only equal in representation across the management team and more broadly across the business, but also is run as a meritocracy. So there are many, many opportunities for women or anybody who is excelling and doing well at their job to cross from technical roles into more customer-facing roles or vice versa. As I said, our head of product and our CEO both came from sales backgrounds. I myself came from a legal background. So that type of environment, I think, is really key, and that has allowed us as a business to excel. So I think we all know the stats. Last year in the UK, the amount of investment, so women-led businesses in the UK AI startup world who raised money were 4%. That number is scary. We were actually one of that 4%, and it is proven that if you have an over 30% female management team, you're going to be 15% more profitable. So the numbers speak for themselves. What is there to argue with? We need to have companies and investors hiring more women, actively going out and hiring them, not just talking about them. We were also very lucky that some of our founding investors invest heavily in women CEOs, and it's really worked out for them. I think 3 of their portfolio company are now worth over $1 billion, and almost all led by women.
Naomi, I mean, this has got to be the way forward, hasn't it? But the numbers right now are pretty poor.
They are poor. But there is opportunity, and there are organisations out there that are trying to focus on women. There's a great VC, venture capital company called Two Magnolias, which focuses solely on female-founded businesses, primarily in the tech space. There are organisations that create networking opportunities, superscalers, that look to help women-led businesses or underrepresented groups go from 10 million to 50 million. That's the crucial piece, that we don't necessarily have the networks because we aren't necessarily doing the things that the men are doing. And I'm afraid that the golf course analogy, though boring though it is, still persists, because a lot of networking is happening in spaces that women are not in.
Why is that? I mean, women socialise as well. I mean, a lot of men play golf, boring
yes,
as
but
it
when
is.
you get this, and I mean, I don't mind
It is
golf.
boring.
There we go. I'll take it from you. I think the issue is more that it's not that they are not there, they're just socialising with each other or they're not being included. Plus, to the point made before, ultimately, we are still the primary caregivers. There's still that assumption that the women are going to look after the children. And there's been a significant decline in population. However, someone still needs to look after these future taxpayers, right? And if the women aren't going to do it, who is? So there's a conundrum there that still needs to be sorted out.
Angelica, just talk to me about that issue of childcare and women being expected to have babies, stay at home, take maternity leave. I mean, how damaging to career prospects in tech is that?
It's damaging to career prospects in general. I think the best way to tell you the problem and a possible solution is to make a comparison between what happened in France and what happened in Italy over the past 30 years. So 30 years ago, France had exactly the same birth rate as Italy. Italy has the second lowest birth rate in the world after Japan, unfortunately. 30 years ago, France started investing heavily in family welfare, which is essentially women supporting welfare. So welfare to allow women to have families with lots of kids if they want, and then also be able to go back to work whilst having that kind of support so they can go back to work. So childcare for young children, etc., longer maternity leaves and whatnot. And today, France's birth rate is the highest in Europe. So France has 2.1 children per person, whereas, 2.1 natality rate, so 2.1 children per couple, whereas Italy's birth rate is 1.4. So I think that is the best way to show how with concrete action you can counter the adverse effect. Otherwise, you end up having women in these more precarious jobs, in these lower paying jobs. And so I think it starts from child welfare and family welfare policies. It goes through education, and it also goes through, as rightly said by my fellow panelists, through mentorship and good examples.
Jager, talk to me about career progression. I read a statistic, 57% of women in tech plan to leave their jobs within 2 years because of a perceived lack of progression and also issues around work-life balance. 57% wanting to leave within 2 years. Is that your experience? I mean, or what you're hearing in the industry?
It's similar to what I've read, which is that twice the number of women leave jobs around mid-career as men. So it stacks up. I work at a very young company, I'll say that much, but personally I have had 2 maternity leaves. So I hope that I'm an example of someone who hasn't felt the need to leave, but I also recognise that the conditions are right at my company and it's not the same for other companies out there. So the government can do more to increase the statutory pay for women because currently it's very low. And that means whilst you can take time off, it's not financially viable to take long off. And so then you come around to the question of actually, if I'm not taking much time off work and then I'm going back to work but paying for childcare, which is incredibly expensive, is it worth me going back at all? So it's a huge, huge problem, and not just in the UK. We have taken strides towards fixing and addressing this, bringing down the cost of childcare for under 3-year-olds, which is happening on a staggered basis starting last year, but it's not enough, and I think we should be doing more.
Naomi, do you think there's anything to be said for the Scandinavian model where couples can share leave once a child is born over the course of 12, 18 months and perhaps, women can get back to doing what they want to do quicker?
I think it's a brilliant model. I think we need more people modelling it. I think one of the biggest issues is that the uptake is quite low. And ultimately, the issue is always this perception that you have to be on all the time. There's that presenteeism, and it's really manifest in the tech world. Tech doesn't stop. And so we need to be there to deliver over and over and over again at great speed. Now, I think as the sort of tech bros retire, which will happen in the next 15, 20 years or so, or maybe even sooner if their bonuses are big enough, then we will be able to see a different workforce, a bit like Luminance, where actually what is modelled is slightly different. And I hope, therefore, that shared parental leave, which I'm hearing more and more about, is actually taken up.
Angelica, many young women will be watching this roundtable. What advice would you give to them studying now, perhaps secondary education, early years of university, thinking about going into the tech sector? What advice would you give a young woman looking at all her opportunities?
My advice is not to be daunted. I remember when I started looking for my first job many years ago, and I ended up working in a very male-oriented space. And it was I was in investment banking, so not tech, but a very bro-ish environment, as we were discussing before. And it is very daunting to find yourself perhaps to be the only girl in the room with a bunch of guys who are trying very hard to make you feel like you don't belong. And don't be daunted, because there is nothing that you can't do. And there is nothing that they can do better than you. The only thing that will limit you is your willingness, well, your skills, which are not tied to your gender, but like tied to your own personal abilities, and your willingness to engage in something that perhaps is outside of what you thought was your comfort zone. So redefining comfort zones is very important as well, and realizing that really there's no such thing, as we said at the very beginning, as something that is right for men and right for women. It depends on everybody's individual inclinations. And I would also say women in tech, but also men in sectors that are perhaps considered to be more female, like education. Why does a teacher have to be a woman? Teachers, there's brilliant male teachers out there. There's brilliant male caregivers out there. So I think we need to degenderify, I don't know if that's a word, but to change gender definitions around all sorts of employment, not just tech.
Jager, to you, what advice would you give?
I would give the advice of not overthinking it. I think 10 years ago, it was kind of scary, and it felt like a huge risk to move from traditional career paths into non-traditional career paths, or take a major sideways step in order to make a forward step. Now, I think the conversations have changed at the school level. They need to go further, but take risks, don't be scared. Just get a foot in the door, go after that tech startup that's beginning. They're looking for hungry, young, hardworking, bright individuals. They often don't care what your background is. They will give you a shot. And so that's exciting, and there is huge opportunity for graduates today.
Naomi, same question to you.
Don't make the tea. Show the difference you can make. That's what I'd say, because often we are in situations where we are expected to make the tea, buy the birthday card, get the cake.
In 2025?
Still happening. Absolutely still happening.
Seriously.
And there is your empathy can go too far. Your motherliness, your sisterliness, your caring. So don't make the tea, show the difference you can make, because you've been hired because you have a skill set that they need.
Fantastic point. Angelica, just come in on that. Don't make the tea.
I mean, I was laughing because I always tell this story. So I had a meeting a few years ago with somebody who didn't know, they knew my surname and my initials, so they didn't know I was a woman. And they came to my office, and I offered them coffee because I always make coffee for my guests. And they immediately assumed that I was the assistant, because there was no way I could be the person that he was meeting with. So yeah, if you offer them coffee or tea, make it very clear that you're doing it because you're hospitable, not because you're the EA.
Jager, I want to pick up on something Angelica said earlier on about not being made to feel that you belong in a certain space. Have you had that experience? I know you're blessed to work with an all-female team now, but have you had that happen previously?
I have to say, in my early days, even working at Luminance, it wasn't about the company itself, but it was the people that I was presenting to. So one of my first meetings ever in the job, and I was in my mid-20s, on my own as a female, walking into a boardroom of a very, very large company that we would all know the name of, but I won't say it today. And it was a boardroom full of men, and they were all sitting around eating their sandwiches, and the look of skepticism on every one of their faces when I walked into the room was enough to, make me probably quiver in my boots. But I sat down, I presented, and remembered that I was actually the expert in what I was talking about. And by the end, I actually saw a huge shift in their perception of me. And so that was a really gratifying experience. But women are met with that every day, and that is undeniable. So, it's unfair, but it is the reality. And there are things that we can do to mentor women and really encourage them to feel the confidence in themselves to face up to those examples.
And Naomi, it's important that we empower young women to get into business, get into industry, and genuinely know that they can have a career to be proud of without being subjected to this.
Yes, it is. And I think, I named my daughter Emmeline after Emmeline Pankhurst, so
yes.
The suffragette who got the women the right to vote. So I'm, passionate about this. I also think we've got to be realistic. often say you can do anything. I don't know that everyone can do everything, but you can do some things really, really well. So find the thing that makes you shine, that makes you really happy. And that's what I hope that we can do for women now in the workforce and for future generations. Find the thing that really makes them shine, and then in turn, that is going to impact the bottom line.
Angelica, final point to you. I mean, the bottom line in tech is that it's an industry that makes billions and billions of euros, pounds, dollars, whatever currency, and women absolutely should be more than fairly represented.
100%. And I think, steps are being made forward, as Jager was saying, and also female-founded prop tech startups raised, I think, $1.5 billion of investment last year, which pales compared to, let's say, global numbers. But the market is starting to take steps in the right direction. Obviously, it'll take time. Naomi was saying we will see change in the next 15 to 20 years when the tech bros retire. And I would agree, it takes time. It's a marathon, not a race. So we can't expect change to happen overnight. And I think every single step along the way counts. So we need to continue raising awareness. We need to continue leading by example. We need to continue lobbying in the right places for the right policies to be put in place, both at company level and at government level and in the education system. And we will get there. I'm sure of it.
Angelica, Naomi and Jager, thank you all so much. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable, TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.